My name is Stephen Petty. I wish to thank the committee and Stephanie Stock for the opportunity to address issues related to data centers. My review will be a quick review of my qualifications, an overview of data centers, issues related to water and wastewater, and chemical biological emissions, and then some closing remarks. I have undergraduate and graduate degrees with honors in chemical engineering, an MBA where I finished first in my class. I was a senior research scientist at Patel and then at Columbia Gas, each for 10 years. The founder and president of ES Group for the last 30 years, so I've been practicing 50 years. I'm a certified industrial hygienist, a health and safety expert, professional engineer in 6 states, certified safety professional and OSHA expert. I have 9 patents and served as an adjunct professor at Franklin teaching geology and environmental. I've sampled for Legionella, mold, bacteria, nerve agents, biotoxin, asbestos, and dozens of organic chemicals. I even sampled the Blue Jackets' locker room to figure out why they were getting sick. I wrote a textbook on forensics engineering based on 10,000 projects, and I've served as an exposure, warnings, and standard of care expert in nearly 400 cases nationally, including benzene, PFAS, C.I.H, silica, and most recently, East Palestine. Recently, I was named a voting member of the ASHRAE Committee on Infectious Diseases. Let's talk a little bit about data centers in Ohio. In 2024, best I can tell, there were around 150. In 2026, we're up to about 191. That's an increase of 41 or 27% in 2 years. While it's undisputed that these data centers will bring increased tax revenue and some jobs to communities, what is often lost is the downstream cost to these communities with regard to electricity, water, wastewater, and potential damage to the environment. And I'll give some examples in a second. In terms of water consumption, using 3,000 as a lower bound for data centers in North America, total water consumption is 21 billion gallons of water, with a discharge of around 6 billion to wastewater treatment systems. A medium-sized data center will use on the order of 100 million gallons of water a year. That's equivalent of about 1,000 U.S. households. The larger hyperscale centers, using 5 million gallons a day, would use the water equivalent of 30 to 50,000 homes. The elephant in the room is really the water quality and wastewater issues from my perspective. Well, everybody talks about how many gallons, few talk about how much water is involved in terms of treatment and where that stuff goes. The potential contaminations include biocides, anti-corrosion agents, minerals, scale, and even metals, as well as forever chemicals. Named forever chemicals because the half-life is 1 million years. In other words, if you have 100 pounds of it in 1 million years, you have 50 pounds. I'm not going to go through all the categories of the concentrations that are in my handout, but I'll give some examples of some of the issues. One of the areas that I've worked on a lot is not only just the chemicals, but biologics, particularly Legionella from cooling towers. I'm working on the New York recent outbreak. And then we also have the potential that these facilities can discharge hot water, 86 to 104 degrees, most into streams, lakes, waters, and other waterways. A lot of the critters don't like that. The good news is that the Ohio EPA would require permits to install and permits to operate based on federal standards for both water and air emissions. The bad news is for pollutants not regulated, they won't be regulated. That would be Legionella, phosphates, molybdates, glycols, biocides, and thermal discharges, along with PFAS. Let me give you an example on PFAS. PFAS is going to be regulated beginning in 2029 to 2031 for municipalities that have to treat PFAS down to 4 to 10 parts per trillion. This is 1 million times lower than most constituents that are at parts per million. I worked on the Middlesex, New Jersey case and did the cost estimates for facilities for 3 different technologies. The cost to that community was $30 to $40 million. So here's the problem. If you allow if the Ohio EPA doesn't regulate PFAS, and that is discharged to the environment, and then the municipality has to pick up that cost in 2029 to 2031, that's a huge cost. So the real issue on the regulatory side is what isn't regulated. And that's where the legislature has to fill in that hole. Potential solutions. Minimize community costs by requiring data centers to sell power, recycle water, and have their own wastewater treatment facilities. Use closed-loop cycles. You need 2 in a data center and 1 for the power plant. Use air-to-air heat exchangers rather than evaporative cooling, because evaporative cooling uses 70 to 80% of that water goes into the air as steam or vapor. Use technologies such as activated carbon ion exchange and reverse osmosis for tertiary treatment to clean out some of these long-lived chemicals. And use continuous monitoring technologies so that we don't find out years or months later that we've got a problem. I have attached a presentation with many more details. Feel free to look at that. I appreciate the time to speak. Please consider these common sense legislation, because I think it's really important that we take the time to not burden our municipalities with downstream costs because things aren't regulated. And what generally happens with industry, and I'm pro-industry, is they're going to take advantage of pushing that cost off to municipalities if they can. If you write the legislation so that they have to incur more of those costs themselves, they will. With that, I'll open up to any questions, but I appreciate the time to speak to you guys.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Committee, are there any questions? Senator Reineke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir. You said legislation. What legislation are you referring to? And what should we be legislating?
Chairman, what I would suggest is that for the chemicals that are not regulated, and there's no evidence at all how EPA is going to regulate PFAS for data centers, for those chemicals, biocides, some of the other metals, and for thermal, I would strongly suggest that you put language in there that that meets guidance documents that are out there.
Follow?
Just in trying to keep with our mission statement of making sure we understand what the facts are, the EPA testified the other day that they have permits to install, they have indirect discharge permits. Why aren't those effective?
They're effective for chemicals that are regulated, but they're not effective for chemicals that are not regulated.
Senator Blackshear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your testimony. You came in as a interested party, and you described, you talked mainly about water quality and discharge. Is this something that we're seeing around the country in terms of the waterways being polluted, as well as our sewage treatment plants being overburdened?
We are. I'll just give you the example on PFAS again. I've been involved in all 4 major litigations settling. I was the exposure expert, standard of care expert. And the problem was there weren't regulations. Now the communities are stuck with these standards at parts per trillion, which are incredibly low. And the technologies to clean these out is very complex. And so what I'm just saying is based on that experience for that one component alone, and I could go through other components as well, what you're going to see ultimately is that the municipalities are going to be stuck with the costs for addressing these issues downstream. And if in fact there isn't laws put in place that address chemicals that aren't regulated.
Hello? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just said that municipalities will get stuck with the cost. Where are they getting this money from?
So far on PFAS, it's through litigation. So if the legislature exempts the data centers for some of these costs, that would void that opportunity for them. So they would bear that burden directly. The taxpayers would pay that cost.
And one more? And then chair. No, I'm sorry, just through the chair.
Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you provided a list of solutions. So let's just say if we don't act on some of the things that you listed, would that then turn you into being an opponent of data centers, or would you still just be sort of neutral in the midst of it? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I think it has a yes and a no component. I'm all for the data centers, but I'm for them being done in the right way.
Okay, thank you. Senator Wilkin. I'm sorry, Mr. Petty. I'm sorry. I'll go up and down and make sure everyone gets.
My apologies, Chairman.
Sir Wilkin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your testimony. So just 2 or 3 questions quickly. When you base your the water usage, are you basing those off of closed loop systems, or what type of system were that? Because you're saying they're using 1 to 5 million gallons per day per data center. Is that correct?
Right. Yes, Chairman. Well, there's where some confusion lies. This is the engineer in me. On the data centers, you have an internal loop that cools the chips, and then that heat is then extracted by an external loop. And then the power plants themselves, if they sell power, have another cooling loop. So when we talk about these closed loops, almost all of them use open loops for ultimately dumping the heat. And a lot of the water that's lost is lost from evaporative cooling. So what I'm suggesting, if you use air-to-air cooling, then you don't have that loss of water. I'm not saying there isn't a single data center that doesn't have closed loop all the way, but it's rare.
Follow up?
I apologize. I didn't hear that last piece. I'm sorry.
I'm not saying that there isn't a potential data center in the United States that isn't closed loop in all 3 loops, but it's rare.
Okay. Follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you, Chair. I guess to expand on that, here in Ohio, when as we talked last week, we can experience almost all 4 seasons in a day. Does the air to air, is that a system that's not going to drain even more power from the grid on our hot, humid dog days of August? Or is there a system?
Well, my advice would be ultimately not to have them tied to the grid. So there would be some additional power associated with the fans, but on the other hand, you're not pumping as much water either, so there's a reduction in pumping power there. So it's complicated to answer that question as an engineer.
Follow up?
Thank you, Chair. You talk about discharge. According to the EPA last week, there's only 1 data center, if I understood them correctly, only 1 data center in the state of Ohio that actually has a discharge permit. What's your response to that? And then what would be your response to those that would discharge into just a sanitary sewer like any other manufacturer or business might?
Chairman, two thoughts. One, the quantities of materials we're talking about are water are much higher. We're talking about relative to, say, individual residents, they're thousands of times higher. Secondly, those discharge permits only address chemicals that are regulated. This is always the problem. It's been my experience, and unfortunately I've been now in litigation for 25 years. I'm probably one of the top exposure experts in the United States. You don't know me because I keep quiet. And my experience in almost all of those is that EPA is always in catch-up mode. The science trails the regulations. So what I'm trying to tell you folks is there are some things here that aren't regulated. They're coming. We know they're coming for the municipalities on PFAS, but not necessarily on the data center side. So the data centers would be technically able to discharge PFAS. But eventually, by 2029, there's an exemption they can go 2 more years, 2031. The municipalities who provide drinking water are going to have to meet these very rigorous standards. So meanwhile, we have that water that they've got to clean up having materials continuously dumped into it. This seems to me we should try to avoid the problem before having to clean it up.
Thank you, Chairman. If I have one last one, I'll let someone else go.
Follow up?
Okay. Thank you so much for your answers. The second one, you said you're not opposed to data centers. provided that legislation is written correctly. So do you think we have the ability here to write legislation which would eliminate the financial burden falling back on the municipalities or the locations where these centers are located or where they want to locate?
Chairman, yeah, I wrote a textbook, and possibility means any probability above 0. I like probable, which means above 50%. I think the possibility is there. I think the probability is less so.
Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Any questions? All right. Co-Chair Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your thoughtful testimony. I just got a couple of general questions and then some specific ones. So I was trying to figure out where are you from?
I'm spoiled now that I'm 70. I spent half my time in Florida and half in Ohio, but I lived 40 years in Ohio before I moved to Florida.
Okay, yep. Are you being paid for this in any way?
No.
Okay, thank you. So for the specific questions, you talked a lot about PFAS, and as an engineer, you know not to paint with too broad a brush, right? And you've gone in and out of that in your testimony. What would be the PFAS source in a data center? Why would they use that in the cooling system?
It comes from the closed-loop cooling systems. It's part of the refrigerant, typically, and it also comes off of the Teflon-coated parts.
So closed loop meaning closed loop, it's not going to be discharged, correct?
No, the literature shows there is leakage from that system.
So leaks can happen. Okay, so leaks can happen in any industry. Okay. What are the common sources of PFAS?
The most common source, PFAS is a surfactant, which is not consumed in generation of products. It's used to make Teflon. The easiest way that I can explain it is people have seen on their windshield, they'll see the raindrops are kind of droplets. And if you add like a Rain-X, it makes it smooth, right? It's a surfactant. Well, PFASs are, in general, surfactants that are used in a different way, but they're used to make Teflon smooth. Otherwise, it would be very lumpy. That's traditionally where it came from. It was used by DuPont and 3M.
May I continue to follow up? And surfactant meaning soap, basically. For the surfactant is a soap, a lubricant of sort. I just want to make sure folks understand what surfactant means.
No, that's, Chairman, with all due respect, that's not true. In fact, I've testified 12 days in federal court on C.I.H about that. And soaps are surfactants, but surfactants is a broad category, but when you, and I know you're a chemical engineer, but by all means, PFAS is a completely different animal than soap with respect to surfactants.
I was just trying to help folks generally understand what a surfactant is, so I'm not going to debate the technical nuances with you. What I do want to ask is what data centers are not the ubiquitous source of PFAS, is that correct?
Ubiquitous. I'm not sure how to answer that question.
PFAS comes from sources far more likely than data centers, is that correct?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's the issue here is not just where does it also come from. The issue is not just the concentration, it's the volume of material involved. And like I said, you can focus on PFAS, and I just gave examples of why that's an issue. But you've got many other unregulated substances, including Legionella.
Thank you. I'm focusing on PFAS because you focused on PFAS. So you said probability and possibility are two different things.
Sure.
So I want to make sure that we are here to gather proper information. We're not here to talk about hyperbole. We're not here to talk about emotions. We're here to gather facts and information. So I just want to make sure that that's what we're getting as this committee. I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just trying to drill down to what the information that we're getting. I just want to make sure that we're careful not to paint with too broad a brush. And I think your comments about paying for costs, I think we agree with you. I think that's what we heard from the testimony last week. We took a lot out of the testimony last week. We heard from the Ohio EPA that data centers are not a source of PFAS. We heard that The ODNR is not necessarily concerned about the water usage, but that doesn't mean that we're not concerned. So we're going to keep looking in this, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about reality here.
Well, I agree, but I would respect, if the EPA said that data centers are not a source of PFAS, then I would respectfully disagree.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman.